Welcome to the Ranking Things podcast, the production of Jason Davis VoiceOver. Visit jasondavisvoice.com. I'm Jason Davis.
And I'm Eric Wright.
Eric, I'm excited for this episode.
You know, we can't break out of the 80s, but
We grew up during the 80s.
I was 15 to 24
Right.
in the 80s. So,
Right.
yeah, that's pretty important
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, I'm a couple of years younger than you, but I mean, it's a very important time for both of us.
Right.
So obviously, you know, we're going to talk about what we know, right? We're going to call this episode Songs That Define the 80s.
Well, you know me, I had a really hard time because when it's a broad category, I need parameters. Like, remember with the singing drummers and all that?
Yeah. You always put like all kinds of rules and limitations on yourself. I do that to some degree, okay? But I kind of feel like it's our podcast.
Right.
It's what we like.
Yeah.
And who gives a shit? There doesn't have to be rules.
Right.
I mean, we want to have a little bit of a format because there is a subject that we're discussing, but it doesn't have to be something where we really like put ourselves in a box.
But I just confided in you a little earlier today about something about my personality and being competitive and always having to feel like I did everything right.
This is the be-all, end-all list of the songs that define the 1980s.
Well, and I won't own up to that at all.
But that's what
Because
you're going
then-
for.
But that's what I'm going for.
Okay.
But it's ridiculous because, I mean, how subjective is music?
Listen, one thing I want to say right out of the gate is that I think we were very, very fortunate to grow up during this time. I think the 80s, growing up, being a teenager in the 80s
Yeah.
was a blast. There was a little bit of technology, but not so much technology like now where like you're being bombarded with all kinds of information.
Right. Your parents know where you are all the time.
Yeah, I mean, MTV
Yeah.
came out in 1981 and it just changed music and it was amazing.
Yes, it did.
It was great.
Yeah. It was
And-
definitely a fun time.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of great music from the 80s too. I mean, there's a lot of shitty music too, no question.
Of course.
And we'll probably talk about some of those shitty songs in this episode.
Well,
but-
yeah. I actually had an ongoing argument with one of my friends. What he thinks is one of the best '80s songs. And I'm like so far the opposite.
I think it's going to be real interesting to see what we have on our top 5 lists. I got to tell you now, my runners-up list
Right.
is very extensive. So,
Well, that's almost how I started this. I just started listing songs that I could remember from the '80s.
right.
And before I knew it, I had like 40.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, oh my gosh. And I'm thinking, how am I going to pare this down? I have some decent logic as to why I chose some things and
Yeah, I
other
mean,
things not.
you know, certainly we both know a decent amount about 80s music being, you know, old guys now that
generation.
grew up in the 80s and stuff. But I guess we should get into it then, right?
I think we should.
All right, what do you got for number 5? Songs that define the 1980s. Number 5, Eric.
This is
go.
probably just about the only one that you'll really agree with me on.
Okay.
Okay.
I like it.
Right?
I don't have it on my top 5 list,
Okay.
but by far
You
a song.
agree?
Oh, absolutely. You hear that song and immediately
Right.
you think
know.
1980s.
And that was it. When I was looking at my list, I'm thinking, wow, I've got a lot of great songs that were just happened to be made in the 80s.
By the way, the final countdown by Europe. If you didn't get it from the
Yes, right. Exactly. If you didn't get it,
Right.
you're not 57
Right.
years old yet.
Although that song, I think, sort of transcends the 1980s a little bit too. I mean, it's been in shows, it's been in movies.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's in
commercials now.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
And
definitely
he still looks good.
Joey Tempest.
Oh my God. See, and I picked that one to be in the list. It was from 1986, by the way.
Right.
Because when I started thinking a little bit about what are the 80s, I started thinking about, well, what was really popular? Well, you know, the big hair.
Oh yeah.
You know, so right away that got me thinking about, you know, the hair bands, which your list, I'm guessing, is going to be more that way, and
See?
mine is going to be a little different.
I'm going to surprise you.
Okay,
I'm going to surprise you a lot. In fact, I made a very conscious effort to not be just that kind of music, even though that's what I was really into back then.
Yeah.
I really, you know, I was into a lot of things. That was my main thing. I really wanted to think songs that came out of the 80s that really have stood the test of time. That's kind of what I went for.
I went the total opposite
Okay,
direction.
that's great. That's what makes this podcast fun.
All right.
I mean,
go
I
ahead.
have some, like on the runners-up list, I'll have some of that too. And a lot of it is also personal choice too.
Well, of course.
You know, because again, it's our podcast. We can decide what we
Right.
want. If people disagree, they can email us
Piss
or whatever.
off.
No, I listen, everybody's got an opinion. That's fine.
Yeah, leave it. So
no.
what's your 5?
Okay, number 5 for me, Jesse's Girl from Rick Springfield.
Oh my God.
So the thing with Jesse's Girl, I remember when that first came out. Now I was very young at the time. Like I wasn't really into music the way I became into music like in my later teen years.
Okay.
So Jesse's Girl came out when I was like 12.
So that's like real early 80s.
Yeah, early 80s, 1981. I remember hearing it on the radio. I remember it being a thing. And then, of course, when MTV came out, I remember the video. Jesse's Girl was a #1 hit for Rick Springfield. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was one of, I don't know how many other #1s he had, but it was his first big hit. He was like a 15-year overnight sensation, too. Like he had been trying to make it in the music industry for 15 years in Australia. He came over to America, and this song came out around the same time that he was on General Hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was like, you know, the perfect storm of celebrity for him, where the song became a huge hit and he was really popular on the show. And then next thing you know, he's in movies and everything else.
Right.
So, but I read about the story behind the song was that he wrote it after meeting a guy and his girlfriend in a stained glass class. He was taking a class making stained glass.
All right. And he wanted her.
And he had the hots for the girl.
Oh.
She wasn't interested.
Oh.
Turns out the guy's name was Gary, not Jesse. But
Gary is a friend.
yeah, it doesn't
Jesse,
work. Exactly. It didn't sing as well as Rick said.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of cool. So it's based on a real life experience for him.
Okay.
Pat Benatar's husband and guitarist Neil Giraldo plays the solo on the song.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Jesse's Girl's been in a lot of movies and TV shows. 13 Going on 30, Boogie Nights, Keeping the Faith, Couples Retreat, Hot Tub Time Machine. And on TV, Dawson's Creek, Californication, 2.5 Men, Master of None, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, one of our favorite shows.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's really stood the test of time. Great song. I still enjoy hearing it when I hear it. And I'd even like at parties as a DJ, it went over really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's not a song that I think you can really dance to a lot, but people dig it. So more than 40 years later, it still works.
Okay.
What do you got for 4?
I have 1982's Blinded Me with Science by Thomas Dolby.
That's a great choice.
Quirkiness. The 80s, definitely you have to say there was a quirkiness.
Oh, God, yeah.
That we weren't seeing at the end of the 70s. Okay, I don't think. In general, there were some bands that were. There's always outliers. I think in the
new wave, I think
early
really
80s, yes. In the early 80s, we got more experimenting with the fun of
making music. Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
And then with MTV coming out, visually things had to be grasping. So now we're starting to see crazy makeups and all the big hair and all that stuff. Blinded Me with Science is on my list because that's just about like one of the quirkiest songs that ever hit the mainstream, you know? I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there. And it was the electronica, and it was kind of like this response to the 70s when we saw the rising of like heavy metal and punk and new wave.
I was just going to say that I think that one of the reasons that music became a little bit more fun in the 80s and silly and goofy is because it might have been a backlash to the punk movement. You know, because punk was so, you know, in your face and, you know, anti-establishment and all that.
Right.
And then the new wave people were just like, we're just here to have fun.
Well, and the thing, too, is that punk, there's definitely a genre of punk where a sense of humor was part of it. But we didn't see that in the mainstream. I mean, you can say like, all right, well, you know, there's the Dead Milkmen and they became fairly big and all that.
Right.
But
I mean, the Ramones, they're not really like the Sex Pistols.
No, not exactly. You're talking very different things.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? But they're both punk. They're both considered punk. I think it's a great choice. You hear that song, you go 80s immediately.
Exactly.
See, I went a little different with my list.
Yeah.
I certainly had songs like that in mind too, but I wanted to think songs from the 80s that impacted me that I think have really, they still play well.
Right.
But that's a little dangerous too, because there's a lot of songs that are now considered classic rock or whatever. But I think there's no wrong answers to this because we're going to talk when we get into anything that didn't make the top 5. I think we're going to probably agree on a lot of stuff.
I went a total different way in my thinking.
See, I like that though.
Yeah.
I like that, you know, because then I think it covers more of what the 80s was.
How boring would it be if you and I had the exact same songs?
It would be very boring.
We'd just be like,
I think it would be,
that was good too.
It would have been amazing if we picked the same. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we have at least one that we share in the top 5, but you never know. If depending on how you're thinking, I don't know.
Yeah.
So this is cool.
So what was your 4?
Number 4 for me, I went a couple of different routes, and then I finally landed earlier on Promises in the Dark by Pat Benatar.
Oh, man.
Now, I wanted to get a female artist in my top 5 for starters, and I can't think of anybody better than Pat Benatar for the 1980s.
You say better.
I love Pat Benatar.
Absolutely. But if you're thinking 80s female, you have to have Madonna and Cyndi Lauper.
Okay. I had thought of both of them too.
Yeah.
I do not like Madonna as an artist.
Right.
I think she's great at reinventing herself. And I get that there's a whole mass of people who love Madonna. And I don't have any problem with that.
Right.
But this is my top 5. My podcast, our podcast, right?
Well, yeah.
If I don't want to talk about Madonna because I feel like Madonna's been talked about enough, I'm not going to talk about Madonna. Right?
All right.
Originally, I actually had Joan Jett, I Love Rock and Roll in this slot.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, no. I mean, that's a great song, and she's a great artist from the 80s and beyond, Joan Jett.
Right.
But Pat Benatar is Pat Benatar. I love Pat Benatar, and I wanted to have Pat Benatar in my top 5. Originally, I had Hit Me With Your Best Shot, because to me, that is like her career song.
And that signifies the 80s the way I'm thinking.
Yes. And I mean, you think of in Fast Times at Ridgemont High when all the girls are dressing up like Pat Benatar.
Right.
Like they're taking her look from that stage of her career pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Promises in the Dark, my favorite Pat Benatar single.
Okay.
It's a great song. It's not her biggest hit. This did reach the top 40. It peaked at number 38. The album that it came from, Precious Time, reached number 1. It's a great song. I still get fired up when I hear it. Mm-hmm. There's so much great about this song. Her voice, the guitar solo by Neil Giraldo is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And they wrote it together. It's kind of interesting. It's a song about dealing with the emotional scars from past relationships and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they wrote the song together. She kind of had the beginnings of it, maybe the lyrics and some of the melody. And then she said, here, see what you can do with this. And then he kind of hashed out the rest of it on a piano, which I think is very cool, especially because it's such a hard driving guitar song. The last verse wasn't written until they were actually recording the song, in the studio, which I think is also very cool. But Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldo were married a year after this, and they just celebrated their 40th anniversary recently.
Holy cow.
So I think it's very cool that a song about breakups and bad relationships ended up leading to them having this great relationship.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's such a great song. Still, it's awesome.
Yeah, well, a good friend of mine, if he was here, he would say he half agrees with you. He agrees with the Pat Benatar.
Okay.
But he would say the song, We're Running with the Shadows On. Yeah.
That's a good one, too. I mean, Love is a Battlefield. But I chose Promises in the Dark because for me, it's her strongest.
It's power.
Yeah, it's power. I mean, Shadows of the Night, great song, too. The video is really cool. The video for Promises in the Dark, I remember very vividly.
Yeah.
Because Pat Benatar was wearing a skin-tight jumpsuit, not leather, but hugged her curves perfectly.
Yes.
And, when you're a
teenager boy.
A teenager, like 13, 14 years old, or, around that age, you're going,
that image is going to stay with you.
Absolutely.
Until you go to bed.
Yeah.
So,
number 3 for you, sir.
And I ran.
Nice.
I ran. So that's from 82, The Flock of Seagulls. Okay. Somewhat quirky, but hitting other things, like the fantastic hair, the video, just the look. I mean, the hair, how freaking cool was
I'm seeing it right. I'm seeing it in my head right now.
I love that song. And I think it just fits with stuff from the 70s, but making it more accessible.
Yeah.
Kind of taking the new waviness of it and making it, poppy. In general, I'm picking songs that are standing the test of time. I do think some of these songs somewhat stand the test of time, but not as wide appeal.
Well, that's the thing. You're picking songs that definitely scream 1980s.
Right.
And I like that. I thought I should go that way too. Then I found myself going, I don't want my top 5 to just be one-hit wonders.
Right.
Because, I mean, that's kind of what's, could happen very easily because the 80s were filled with a lot of that. I mean, but I think I Ran is a great song, for what it is. But good choice. Excellent.
All right. And you're 3.
Number 3 for me was Jump by Van Halen. Look, I got to have Van Halen in my top 5 for the 1980s. I gotta. Now,
because you're going that way.
Right, exactly. That's what makes the podcast interesting, at least to me.
I was thinking about Jump. Of course, I think about Van Halen. I'm like, but Panama, no, that song still is great. Jump, I'm like, Jump is almost 80s exclusive kind of, but
Oh, I don't know about that.
Not enough for my list.
I mean, Jump is a very 80s sounding song with the keyboards and stuff.
Right.
And it was very different for Van Halen at the time.
Yeah.
Now, if you asked me what song from that album I prefer, Panama every day.
Right.
I mean, that's a fucking great song.
Right.
But I think Jump is a #1 hit for Van Halen. It was gigantic. I mean, I remember the song being so ubiquitous at the time when it first came out and became a hit that I was sitting, hanging out with some friends, and I'm like, I bet if I turn the radio on right now, Jump will be on. Click, there it was. Like, literally.
Well, Jump holds a place in my heart because in college for a few years, every semester they had a battle of the bands.
Okay.
And we won twice. And the first time we won, we did Hot for Teacher and Jump. Jump was the song that everybody knew.
Right.
So then we came back for the encore. And
Okay.
our encore was Panama. And then we won.
Nice.
And we were like, we have to do another one?
Uh-oh.
So we did Jump again.
Okay. Well, that's not a bad thing.
So I hold that in my heart. Yeah.
Dave and Ted Templeman, their producer, did not think this should be a Van Halen song for a couple of reasons. Ted was like, the keyboard part is very pedestrian. You're a fucking amazing musician.
Right.
And, you know, it's a very simple keyboard part. It doesn't sound like a Van Halen song.
Right.
Dave was like, you're a guitar hero. You can't be doing keyboards. You're a guitar hero. And he wanted to keep going down that road. But look, Eddie's an artist. He started on piano.
Right. I would say his parents, his father, I think particularly was into music.
Yeah, he was
playing
classically
oboe
trained and all that. Yeah, exactly. So Eddie really fought for it, and good thing he did because of the success that it had. And honestly, 1984 was a big album in great part to the success of Jump, I would say. When the video came out, very low budget, you could tell.
Yeah.
I remember David Lee Roth saying that most of the budget went to beer, which I believe that. There's a guy on YouTube. His name is Rick Beato, Beato.
Okay.
He has a great channel with all kinds of very informative kind of stuff. He's a producer and musician. He does a series of videos called What Makes This Song Great. Episode 61 of that series is about this song. 20 minutes well spent.
Really?
You'll hear things in the song you didn't even know were there.
Okay.
There's stuff going on under the guitar solo in this song. It's not out front because obviously the guitar solo is the thing that you want to be listening to. But there's a groove that goes on there. Alex Van Halen's drumming and the keyboard part that goes on under the guitar solo. That's so cool. And that's highlighted in this video that Rick Beato did. So anyway, look for that on YouTube.
Beato.
Rick Beato.
Rick Beato. I'll look.
All right. What do you got for number 2?
Number 2 from 1985. Take on me.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Not yup. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
I just remember this song was ginormous. But the video
is
so
to this day one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest.
I think so. The first time I saw that video, I was hanging out with some friends, college party, so there'd been a little drinking, a couple people throwing up in the corner, whatever. But MTV was making this big deal. Oh, we're gonna have this video soon. And we're like, who the hell's Like,
Yeah.
And when they brought that video on, we were like, wow, we weren't huge into the music. Because most of the guys that I was hanging around with had very varied tastes. I mean, deadheads and metalheads. So no one agreed on that.
I definitely appreciate the song itself more now as I'm older. To me, if it didn't have loud guitars and drums back then, I could take it or leave it.
Yeah, no.
But the video was phenomenal.
Right. Anyway, that's my number 2.
And very 80s too.
Very 80s.
Number 2 for me, Living on a Prayer, Bon Jovi.
You picked that just so I would sigh.
Dude, there's no denying how great Living on a Prayer is as a song. I don't care if you hate Bon Jovi. You can't sit there and say that you're not going to acknowledge that it's a great song.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody. And it's not just because we're from Jersey
Bon
either.
Jovi fine.
Yeah. Bon Jovi was a big part of my experience as a teenager too, though. And I have to say that I'm more of a fan of that earlier stuff. Than what they're doing now. I think Bon Jovi without Richie Sambora doesn't make sense to me, personally, for a lot of reasons.
Right. Okay. Did he help with the writing?
Oh, God,
stuff?
yeah.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's one of the co-writers on this song with John, Richie Sambora, and Desmond Child wrote this.
Okay.
Big part of their sound, his vocals.
Oh, yeah.
Those two voices together, define the Bon Jovi sound back in the day.
Yeah. And the way I'm defining 80s, they definitely fit in there. You know, they got the hair, they had the jeans and the leather shirts and all that.
I mean, it sounds like your direction was more like bands that really were more about the 80s.
Right.
I went for songs that came out in the 80s that have a lot of impact and are still relevant.
Exactly.
And artists too. I mean, look, Bon Jovi's still out there. You know, they're still doing stuff. So good for them that they were able to kind of roll with the punches, so to speak, because they could have very easily been one of those bands that once the big hair kind of went away, they could have been part of that. But they pivoted at the right time. They got away from like the real glammed up sort of look before it became, you know, out of style.
Too passe for them or by age or whatever.
Exactly. But there's a lot of great stuff about this song that I just want to really quick.
Yeah.
Originally, John didn't want to put this on the album. He thought it wasn't good enough and it's hard to sing, all this kind of stuff. Richie Sambora and Desmond Child knew it was a hit. They got some help for what they referred to at the time as the Pizza Parlor Jury. They had recorded up in Vancouver, and then they brought a cassette to a place called Enzo's in Sayreville, which is John Bon Jovi's hometown. It's now called Angelo's, by the way. It's on Main Street in a little strip mall. But anyway, so they went down there with the boombox and the cassette, and they played all the songs that they were considering for the album for the kids that were hanging out in the pizza shop.
Okay.
Go right to the audience, right?
Makes sense.
And based on the feedback that they got, that's a lot of what went into what became Slippery When Wet. Obviously, it wasn't totally up to them, but they made a case for Living on a Prayer, and that's how it ended up on the album. Became a #1 hit. John Bon Jovi admitted in a 2020 interview that he kind of struggles with the key change. He said, I was a younger man at the time, and, you know, every single time that key change comes up, I think, what were you thinking? But, you know, I was 25, young and dumb.
Right.
And that's probably true.
Strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah.
Man. You don't know if you're going to be around
you don't
in
know
40 years.
Exactly. You don't know if 40 years later you're still going to be singing the song, right?
And you got to be thinking, wow, if 40 years from now I'm still singing this song, I'm either doing really great so I can sing it however the hell I want.
Or I'm in Branson, Missouri.
Or I'm like singing at balloon festivals.
Oh, God. In the song, Tommy and Gina, right?
Right.
So Tommy was originally going to be Johnny because that's Desmond Child's actual name. John Bon Jovi thought it was too on the nose because John Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
So that's how it became Tommy.
Okay.
Gina, and plus Desmond Child liked that it was an alliteration with Gina, Johnny and Gina.
Okay.
So the story is kind of based on Desmond Child's actual life. His girlfriend at the time, Maria Vidal, was nicknamed Gina by some of her coworkers because she looked like Gina Lollobrigida.
Hey now.
I think it's kind of cool that it's actually sort of based on a real story.
Yeah.
He didn't work on a dock, but she actually worked in a diner.
So you're halfway there.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Oh,
hey.
Nice.
Oh, my gosh.
What do you got for #1?
My #1 from 1985, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds.
That's a great choice.
I'm kind of going away from my rule about it being just an 80s song because this song definitely still resonates. I mean, what was that movie not that long ago with all the female singers?
Oh, Pitch Perfect.
Pitch Perfect.
Yeah.
You know, it's brought in then. And it's like, and my kids knew the song. I remember when we were in Scouts and they were teens. So this is in the early, 2000s. People are talking about that song or they're playing it. I'm like, oh my God, these teenagers are... A lot of them were listening to classic rock because they were learning guitar. But then this song would come up too. And I was like kind of surprised because it definitely has the 80s sound. It's got, the keyboards and stuff to it. But I love his vocals. I remember when they were in Philadelphia, 1980 something was a Feed the World, the big concert that was in Philly and also in London at the same time.
Oh, Live Aid.
Live Aid. So I just remember we were watching Live Aid and some of the bands, it was hard to understand them or it was either early in the morning and they were already drunk. It's just, but then when Simple Minds came out, we're like, oh, this is going to sound horrible. It sounded great.
Huh.
It really did. His voice was awesome. All the electronica sounded really good. That just hit us.
It's from a great movie, too. The Breakfast Club has stood the test of time. Right. And so the song, and honestly, there's so many great soundtrack songs from the 80s that could easily be on, a top 5 songs from the 80s list.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But so I'm glad at least you named one.
Okay.
Because my #1 does not come from a movie.
I'm really dying to hear
what
you got. It's not Lick It Up, is it?
No, God, no.
Thank you.
That's one of the worst Kiss songs.
What's your number one?
Are you on the edge of your seat, sir?
I really am.
Well, I don't think you could do a top 5 list of songs from the 80s without mentioning one of the biggest artists for the 1980s.
Michael Jackson.
Billie Jean is number 1 for me.
Really?
Yeah. I originally thought I was going to do Beat It for a couple of reasons. One, Eddie Van Halen's guitar solo. I know. Predictable.
But that was very 80s.
2, Weird Al did a parody of Beat It.
Which was awesome.
And that's iconic.
Yeah.
But then I said, look, Billie Jean, it's his best-selling single.
Right.
Okay. Number 1 hit.
Yeah.
The first time we saw him moonwalk was to this on that Motown
was it?
special,
Okay.
Motown 25th anniversary special.
Okay.
The video for Billie Jean was the first video played on MTV by an African-American artist,
Okay.
which to me is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I think at the time, they justified it as, well, we're trying to be more of a rock thing. They got a lot of pressure, and then eventually, obviously, they had to be more diversified than what they were playing. And look, the video for Billie Jean, all of his videos from this album were pretty iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Michael Jackson...
King of Pop.
King of Pop.
Prince of Pop. No.
He's the
He is
king
the
of
king
pop.
of pop.
Yeah.
So then who's the Prince of Pop?
Prince, I guess.
Prince.
But Thriller is still the highest selling album of all time, 40 years later. Sales of around 67 million.
Yeah, that's nuts. We
All
want to
right.
do our
Runners up.
essential runners up.
Yeah, I mean, there's I can't believe how long my list is.
I'm going to start with 1980 Funky Town.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
To me, that is super 80s. That's
Oh, yeah.
and
It's
you
like,
and you can say
doesn't
and
get
you
more
can-
80s than that.
And and I hear that, and then that reminds me what you just said about them Van Halen almost not doing Jump,
Right.
because that keyboard was very basic and pedestrian, and,
Right.
But that's what the popular 80s stuff was,
Right.
And
I think Eddie probably knew that. He said, well, if I can incorporate that and my guitar in a song, there you go.
yeah, and he's Eddie Van Halen, man.
Yeah, exactly. Don't question the master.
Right. So Funky Town, Lips, that's kind of like
Lips Inc.
Lips Inc. So that's kind of like
Lip sync. Get it?
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
I never thought of that. I'm such an idiot.
There you go. I just blew your mind.
You did. You
Cool.
totally blew it. What do you got?
Oh, Mickey, you're so fine. You're so fine. You blow my mind. Hey, Mickey.
Hey, Mickey. Yes.
I mean, what's more 80s than that?
Wow.
Very
That's-
little, right? See, now that almost ended up in my top 5, but then I'm like, I don't like that song enough to make it in my top 5 of the 1980s.
Right. Well, and
That's I wanted the top 5 that I chose to be songs that I actually really liked a lot, too.
okay. Yeah, mine were.
You went a different way. Although you like the songs
I
you
did
chose.
like the songs.
Okay.
I did go, slightly different way, let it to be more representative of the 80s. So here's one. Tainted Love.
Oh, yeah.
Well, come on.
Absolutely.
You turn that on, you're like, oop, 80s.
When a problem comes along, you must whip it.
Before the cream sits out too long.
I mean, come on.
You got to Devo before I did. I
I
can't
know.
believe
Amazing,
that.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, Eileen.
Yes. It might be gross, but.
That's COME on Eileen.
Right, yes. Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Material Girl by
Yeah.
Madonna.
I had Like a Virgin from Madonna.
Sure.
Only because when she performed it on the MTV Music Awards, her like writhing around on the bed in the bridal gown and the whole
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
that was iconic.
That's an image.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I
And the
think-
video for Like a Virgin was cool too. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's just because Material Girl, I
Yeah.
just picked that song because the background singing
Yeah.
is robotic. Like,
Living in a material world. Yeah, and that sounds very 80s.
it's the safety dance.
Oh, yeah, I had that.
See, I'm
Yep.
heading quirky.
On my runners-up list, there's a lot of that, but there's also stuff like Pour Some Sugar on Me, a song that was gigantic for
love
Def
that
Leppard.
song.
Yeah. Last night, Sue and I decided to watch Ghostbusters again.
Oh, my God.
And as soon as that theme song started, I'm like, holy shit.
Yes.
I mean, first of all, that movie is a
Yeah, it was
classic.
great movie. Yes. Great movie.
And the song is, part of the success of everything.
Yeah,
So,
I would put that on my songs of the 80s list.
yeah.
Definitely. 'Cause
Absolutely.
that has the sound. So
Yep,
it's kind
absolutely.
of fun and quirky and all that.
You avoided all hard rock and hair metal and whatever you want.
guess-
We're Not Gonna Take It. It's another one from Twisted Sister. I mean, that one's, again, has really stood the test of time.
Yeah.
A lot of people use it for political purposes, blah, 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 whatever.
right.
But back in the day, when that song first came out, now you got to remember, that song first came out I'm in 8th or ninth grade.
Yeah.
And when those fucking guys came, the video for that song was amazing.
That's great.
It was amazing. The humor, the guy that I guess is supposed to be Niedermeyer.
Right, yes.
They don't actually call him that, probably for copyright issues.
Right, but it is him.
Same actor. And,
Yes.
he does the whole pledge pin on your uniform stuff. So, I mean, it was just phenomenal.
Well, Twisted Sister, yeah, that's kind of one of those bands that I would be on the cusp. Definitely huge in the 80s, but they also did live on. Maybe it's also, since I do have
But look
rock
at them,
and
though.
roll tendencies.
They scream the 80s, everything about them, the big hair, the makeup, the flat, the brightly colored outfits.
Yeah.
And, fist pumping hard rock.
No synthesizers.
Definitely not.
Which leads me to my next two.
Okay.
Both by Falco.
Okay.
Oh, rock me Amadeus. Oh, no, rock me Amadeus. And Alles klar, El Commissar? Or Der Kommissar.
Der
Oh, my
Kommissar.
God. El? That's Spanish.
Yeah.
Forgive me. Grandpa, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and you're German.
Opa. Supposed to be. Super 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come On, Feel the Noise, Quiet Riot, Walk This Way, Run DMC, Aerosmith.
Aerosmith. Yeah.
Come on, that song, not only did it cross barriers, but it rejuvenated Aerosmith's career. Don't Stop Believin', Journey.
Okay.
Summer of 69, Bryan Adams.
See, those last two are songs that I would say don't belong in 80s because,
These are songs that have stood the test of time.
yeah, I kind of.
But you're going more that sound like the 80s. What about Duran Duran, Hungry Like the Wolf?
Yeah.
So any songs that really still get a lot of airplay now, you don't think should be on this list?
In general, I mean, I'm trying to think of one. Like, do you hear Relax, Don't Do It? Do you hear that anymore?
Not nearly as much as you did
that's
back then, that's for sure.
Crazy huge 80s.
Yeah.
Right?
I got one.
What?
You're too shy.
Hush, hush, I do I.
Kaja Gugu.
Oh, that's great. I like that.
Betty Davis Eyes.
Yeah, okay.
That was a ginormous hit in the early
was.
80s, dude.
Yeah, I know.
All right, what do you
Blister in the Sun, Violent Femmes.
Okay.
Although I have a little note that they're not quintessential 80s.
Right.
Because, that kind of
That's another one
song
that,
you
like-
you could say that might be 90s even.
Yeah, and you can still play it now, and people go, yeah.
Right, yeah. And it's like, oh, it might be fresh and new. So if I have to go back, I'm really sticking to my guns. I
Okay.
have like, if you leave,
Okay.
don't look back. OMD.
Yep.
Hold me now.
Thompson Twins, yep.
Right. I just died in your arms tonight.
Cutting Crew, nice.
Okay. How about
Josie's on a vacation far away. Your Love by the Outfield. That's a great song, dude.
You spin me right round, baby.
Nice. Addicted to Love by Robert Palmer. Centerfold, Jay Giles Band. Dancing in the Dark, Bruce Springsteen. Rebel Yell, Billy Idol.
Yeah, see, those songs to me.
I got one.
Okay.
You're going to agree with this one.
Okay.
I remember when this song first came out, I liked it so much. I think I even had a 45 of it. And I remember when MTV first came out thinking, oh, I just want to see the video for this song. Human League, Don't You Want Me?
Don't you? Yes. Oh, right there. I totally agree.
Okay.
West End Girl.
Oh,
by Pet Shop Boys.
Pet Shop Boys, okay.
All right. I'll stop the world and melt with you.
Modern English.
Modern English, right?
Yep.
This much is true.
Oh, Spandau Ballet. Oh,
All
my
right.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, if it's new wave, it qualifies pretty much.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of heading
See,
that way.
but
because
dude-
I think rock and roll is more timeless.
It is, but the rock and roll songs that came out of the 80s still remind me of the 80s. Power of Love, Huey Lewis and the News, or anything by Huey Lewis and the News.
What I'm not
Down Under.
What I'm not hearing from you, which is surprising me, maybe they're coming, is the hair bands.
Well,
why am I not hearing like Warrant from you and
because
some of those others?
Because I think that's like it's almost its own genre now. I think that like it's all very 80s for the same reasons that you're poo-pooing like my classic rock stuff.
yeah,
Like Warrant was pretty big. And they had a couple of pretty big songs.
yeah.
But they're not Def Leppard big,
Right.
for example.
And I'm not saying for me this whole exercise has not been the bigness of the band.
I get that. Home Sweet Home by Motley
Home Sweet
Crue.
Home, yes.
Yeah, which was one that I
almost-
talked about on the Power Ballad episode of Ranking Things.
Yeah.
But I mean,
here I go again on my own.
yeah, White Snake, yep. 8675309.
Oh, that's its own thing.
I mean, that's a total 80s song. Prince obviously transcended the 80s, but
Right.
like he was fucking huge in the 80s, dude.
Right.
So how do you not consider him quintessential 80s or, an artist that defined the 80s,
No, he does.
When Doves Cry is one I had.
Oh, okay.
How about like stuff from movies, like Axel F theme from Beverly Hills Cop?
Oh, that is...
And the one from Ferris Bueller.
Yes. Crazy 80s. Crazy 80s.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably...
We could go on for hours. I have 3 more pages.
Oh,
and I'm
God.
not... Right. So.
Yeah, I think we should end now. Unfortunately, as we wrap things up, we came into this podcast with sort of a different mindset, but I think we're both correct. How's that?
Yeah, well, especially since near the end you were coming around to my side. We could sit here for hours.
But nobody wants that.
No.
So let's wrap it up.
No, we talked too much already.
Hey, thanks for joining us for the Ranking Things podcast, a production of Jason Davis VoiceOver. Please visit jasondavisvoice.com if you need a voice for a commercial, internet and corporate video, e-learning, phone message, and more. Hey, if you want to get involved in the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us rankingpodcast@yahoo.com or tweet @JasonDavisVoice. Eric, thank you for another fun episode.
Super thrilled to be here, as always.
And thank you for listening to the Ranking Things podcast.